Hi, everybody. Welcome to Paradigm Law. This is Lindsay here, and we have Anita with us. We are going to have a detailed analysis of the CLAT 2024 paper. So today we're going to look at each section, okay, of the paper. And this is the set C of the CLAT 2024. Now, there were 4 sets that were released, and each of you may not have the same order of questions that we're going to discuss, but the content is the same. So we'll talk about breakup of the sections. We'll talk about marks weightage, what a good score could have been, and also what is the cutoff for the top 3 national law schools. Hi, Anita.
Hi, Lindsay, and hi, audience. So let's dive right into the paper. CLAT introduced a new pattern of sorts. They gave you only 120 questions, and you had a whole 120 minutes to work on those questions. That meant that they were expecting you to have lesser number of questions for the same amount of time as last year's CLAT, which of course made the task easier for many of us who were writing the CLAT. And coming to the breakdown of each section, as you can see, English and logic both had 24 marks. Current affairs was bumped up a bit. So current affairs had 28 questions, therefore 28 marks. Quant had the least number of marks with only 12 questions, and legal reasoning was given most weightage with 32 questions amounting to 32 marks. Now, what we assign on in the right hand column is a good score that will help you secure a seat in a top tier law school. So as per our estimates, if you get a good score in English of 21 marks, in current affairs 24 is a good score. Logical reasoning was a bit tough with some tough passages in between, so 17 would be a good score here. Legal reasoning 2, we think 25 would be a good score here. Quant was a very easy section, therefore we think a score of 10 would keep you in, give you a good score here. So 97 is what we are predicting to be a good score for top 3 national law schools in under CLAT. Let's move to the English section now.
Sure. So this is the English section with 4 passages, and there were 6 questions each. Now, the first passage, now we're discussing the set C of the CLAT 2024. There were 4 sets given. So this is the set C. The first passage was by Anita Desai, the book Fire on the Mountain. This is an excerpt from that. This was one of the easiest passages in the whole of the section. You could, I would say it was quite easy. All 6 questions were very direct, and you only had to look at the options and you would know what the right answer is. They were quite direct and easy to answer. Passage 2 was based on contemporary text. So here about contemporary literature, this was about the interplay between character and setting, the analysis of that. Okay, again, it's all the answers were directly given. You will see, for example, when you look through the questions, you will see that all the answers are within the passage. So anyone attempting this paper would have immediately relaxed looking at the questions, and compared to the previous question. This was sections. Passage 3 again was based on English literature, and here they had talked about different authors and how these different authors approached English language and how it was presented. Okay, so again, this was quite easy. I think the 4th passage, which is an excerpt from an article written in the Frontline magazine, Justice and the Two Ideas of India. Here you had a little bit of, you had to put your thinking caps on and think on what the questions were. So I would rate these questions as moderate, okay, because they asked you main point or central thesis. Then they asked you contextual vocabulary like docket excluded, what it meant, and so on. So there was a little bit of vocabulary questions in this. And so I would say also they asked you author's opinion, what he's likely to agree with, disagree with, and so on. I would say it's the level of difficulty was moderate in section in the fourth passage of the English section. That's my opinion.
So the only thing I'd like to add here is that the first three passages seems particularly easy. So that was a straight 3 into 6 marks, which is 18 marks, which was sitters. And anyone who could solve the fourth passage relatively well would have an advantage. So language skills would really help people who were attempting this paper, especially those who had worked on advanced reading comprehension passages, because they would stand at an advantage here while solving passage 4. And 6 marks in passage 4 would help anyone score well in this section above everybody else, because see, 18 marks is straightforward, but the remaining 6 marks is where the clincher is. So anyone who did well in passage 4 would definitely do better than the others who attempted the first 3 passages. And keeping this in mind, um, we can easily say that if you had scored at least 3 marks on these 6 marks, you could get 21 marks in the English section, which is according to us is a good score in for this particular exam.
Coming to the current affairs section, we had 28 questions and 5 sets of passages or paragraphs rather. So the first 4 paragraphs had 6 questions each, whereas the last one, the one based on the Israel-Hamas armed conflict, had 4 questions each. So let's look at the first one, the Dr. Ambedkar's address. Now, again, this was fairly easy because from a comprehension point of view, if you read the text, you should be able to answer all these questions. Is this current affairs? No. Okay, this is more like RC. And I would say if you read the text and you look at the questions, and you should be able to eliminate and find the right answer. So here, technically, it's an RC question. Moving on to the next one, the next passage is based on the G20 summit. Now, this is the typical current affairs question that we expect. Okay, a passage on an event, an international event with many parties involved, and dates and things are very important, the venue, and also the announcement of where the next G20 is going to take place. So these are all questions on expected lines for current affairs. So fairly good, very easy if you've gone through information on the G20. The next passage is on the Jallianwala Bagh incident, and a historical event. Nevertheless, it has some importance because it's part of our freedom struggle and so on. So again, here some of the questions were very direct, some of them not so direct. I would say easy to moderate. Okay, some comprehension is required while handling this passage. Coming to the next one, we are looking at the Chandrayaan-3. So this passage was based on Prime Minister Modi's speech on the successful launch of Chandrayaan-3. If you recall, he wasn't in the country, but one of the questions asks you, whom does he address in the speech? Okay, so a lot of people may have got confused on that one particular question, whom did the PM address this to? So was it people of India, to the students, to the world? The right answer is scientists of ISRO. Okay, so he was congratulating them. So I think this was one tricky question in the whole of, in all these questions asked about Chandrayaan. Everything else was direct and to the point. You read the text, you will remember what you've learned about Chandrayaan-3, the role of Prayagan and so on, right? Very direct and current affairs based questions for Chandrayaan-3. The last passage was, I would say, moderately difficult. Okay, this was based on Israel-Hamas armed conflict, which began on the 7th of October. Now, here, I think the first 2 or 3 questions are slightly difficult. What is the reason that led to this conflict? What is the reaction of the international community? And which of the following is not true about the historical context of this conflict? These 3 questions, you will not find the answer in the passage. You should have prior knowledge, right? You should have read about what the conflict was. So if you were aware of the event, you would know how to answer those questions. The other 3 questions in the same passage are all directly from the paragraph given, so you should be able to answer it. Anita, do you want to comment?
Sure. So, my only takeaway from this is that this year in CLAT, in the first passage with about Dr. Ambedkar, it was more of comprehension, and also what I realized was when I went through the Jallianwala Bagh passage, I realized that they were all sitters, except for the last question about the name of General Dyer, which typically, if someone didn't know, I mean, they should have actually left out the question totally rather than dive into it and, probably get a negative score. So this was the question 40 was something that ideally everyone should have just left out because it was I mean, this is not something that's taught in school in the sense that they typically don't tell you his full name, and to recall it would be just, you wouldn't have to, and why unnecessarily take a chance of this nature in an exam of this competitive nature, right? Overall, we feel that a score of 24 on 28 would be a good score. And also keeping in mind what kind of passages they've taken in this year's CLAT, those who plan to write CLAT in the coming year, please make sure that you keep abreast with whatever's happening around you, and taking a lesson out of the Israel-Hamas set of questions. Do not ignore the historical background when it leads to an event. So, anyone who done some extra reading with respect to the Israel-Hamas conflict would have definitely gained some extra marks here, because the kind of questions they asked was uh, of a moderate level, and not everyone would have known the answers. So, passage 5 would be a game changer, anyone with that kind of information. Passage 1 to 4, if you've scored well, uh, most of the content was something that you should have studied. And in fact, the Ambedkar questions were right from the passage. So, keeping all this in mind, 24 or 28 would be a good score for someone who's vying for the top colleges.
That's right. Well, coming to the logical reasoning section. Now, this was quite, I would say, moderate to difficult level of questions, because within each passage, you had to go back and keep looking at the text to answer each of those questions. Now, here we had 4 passages with 6 questions each, I believe. Let's look at the paper. The first question here is about being employed as a consultant for a manufacturing company. And here they've given you certain information about how or why the company's productivity has gone down. Now, this is a decision-making problem. Okay, under logical reasoning, we have something known as decision-making. Now, here that's what it is. If you go through these questions, you will see that each question will expect you to go back to the paragraph and find the answer. For example, which of the following is a potential root cause, right? Root cause problems, and then you'll have to see what leads to that, right? So you have a problem, there's some root causes, and for that root cause, you'll also have another cause, right? And similarly, all these questions, right, they're quite challenging. So the critical difference between the company's situation and that of its competitors, again, you go back and look at how the competitors are doing here, that has been mentioned, and so on, right? So each question you will have to keep going back. That was the first question. The second passage is based on words remain an enigma. Now here again, this passage was, I would say, moderately easy, because they're asking you a central theme. They asked you one about symbolism, right? And then also they asked you about what you could conclude or from the text, conclusions that could be drawn from the statements given and so on. So here it's more about critical reasoning, which is an expected question under logical reasoning for a CLAT kind of exam. The next passage was based on an excerpt from a news article, I believe, from the Indian Express about the quota suicides. Okay, and here this passage was a very typical critical reasoning question. Now, what makes this passage difficult is they asked you all the contrarian questions, in the sense they're asking you which one of the following is not likely the leading cause for suicide, which of the following is not true regarding education system, and so on. So there the passage will give you what are the likely reasons, and you need to figure out from the options given what is not the likely reason. So you will spend some time answering the questions. Again, strengthen the argument. Which of the following is correct regarding? So that means there are 3 false answers and 1 true answer that you need to find. Which of the following statements reflects the use of online platform? Probably that is the only direct question they asked you in this passage. Again, which of the following is not a challenge for quality education? The next paragraph is about artificial intelligence, how India is not ready to face this challenge. Okay, and here again, I think moderately easy because it's critical reasoning. Which of the following is the author most likely to agree with? Most strengthen the main points, and so on. So find the main point, find the supporting arguments, and you'll get your answer. Which of the following would the author most likely to agree with? And so on. Okay, so this was relatively easy of all the passages given under this section. Over to you, Anita.
So our assessment of this particular section of logical reasoning is that it was moderately easy to kind of intersperse with some tougher questions. And however, the biggest takeaway from this one is that this would have been a time-consuming section because it would take people time to go through this and answer it accurately. So they, by keeping this section a bit tough, moderately tough, and also keeping a different kind of a question here, something called decision making, from a topic called decision making, they kind of, gave a googly of sorts. However, having said that, we feel that a score of around 17 marks would be a good score in this section. And that would enable students to secure a good spot in a top NLU.
So that's right. The first passage on decision-making problem, that was something which was, I would say, moderately difficult. But the other 3 passages were all critical reasoning passages, fairly easy if you've practiced critical reasoning, right? To understand what the author's point of view is, to know which are the supporting arguments, central theme, and so on. So I would say overall, logical reasoning section, our critical reasoning, was a very good mix of moderate to difficult questions. So let's look at the next section, which is the legal reasoning section. So here we had a total number of questions were about 32 and 5 passages.
The first passage on set seat spoke about the press and registration of periodicals bill. Okay, the passage itself was pretty easy. And if you go down to the section, also the questions, I'm sorry, Each question was quite clearly from the passage. So anyone attempting this sort of a question set would not have found it difficult to solve any of the questions. In fact, a lot of them were sitters, as in very, very easy questions. Um, they obviously threw a dash of constitutional law as well. In this particular question, you can see that there was a reference to Article 19(1)(a), and it also spoke about some easy stuff which you could find right in the passage. The next passage was on the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children's Act. This was very easy. All the answers were in the passage itself. So anyone who took the time to read the passage carefully could have solved each and every question here and would have got full marks in this set of questions. Okay, for instance, they've asked very easy stuff right from who makes up the juvenile board. For instance, here, look at this question. And right here, they've given out what the board consists of. So it was really easy for anyone who took time, looked at the questions, looked at the passages, and solved it. Now, moving to the third passage, it was about online defamation. It spoke about the legal system around the legal landscape surrounding online defamation. This was also a relatively easy passage, and if you had read the passage carefully, all the answers lay in it, and you could have solved all 6, 7 questions given under this particular question set. Okay, moving to the next set of questions. This particular question set, legal problem spoke about void and voidable marriages and a Supreme Court judgment about that uh, marriage and also inheritance rights. And then based on this passage, which I can see was slightly lengthier than the other passages seen earlier, what they did was they gave typical legal reasoning problems here based on the content of that passage. And the legal reasoning problems were slightly lengthy. So anyone attempting this would have had to spend a little more time in this particular question set. But the questions as such were not difficult and were something that you could have solved uh, relatively easily if you had practiced enough questions of this nature. But all of them were a fact and problem situation kind of questions. See the Ajay problem or the Kaushalya problem, or even if you see this particular Ashama and Ashok problem, they're all legal reasoning problems based on the above uh, passage itself. Okay. And as you can see, they had a few more. So they had around 5, 6 legal reasoning problems under this particular question set. The next passage was about digital personal data protection. Okay. And this is what I realized is that they gave a lot of bills this time. So students who are, who had read the bills and kind of read about them, the advantages, why it was being, why, the bill had come out, what was the reason, they would definitely had stood at an advantage here because they had prior knowledge of the content in some sort of way because they would have read about it. So, what I would call this section would be legal current affairs because all these bills have come out in the recent past. So someone who's studying for the next year's CLAT, I would advise you to keep abreast of whatever's happening in the legal legislative section of parliament as well. What bills are they passing, or what kind of judgments the Supreme Court is passing? You have to know what's happening around you in the legal world as well, because they typically will take content from there and give it to you in the entrance exam paper. So this passage also is from a recent bill that was being discussed, which has become a law as such, and guidelines are awaited. But under this, we also notice that they give some sort of a legal reasoning problem like the Mr. Lal problem, had some content based on a legal reasoning problem and built into the rules given in the bill. So some of this was easy to complete, and some of the questions might have been slightly difficult, but in any exam, you won't find the entire paper being completely easy. They will be interspersed with questions of moderate to big, tough questions. So you have to be clever enough to figure out which questions are really easy and which you should attempt. And if you come across a question which you feel you're not sure about, it's advisable to leave that question out completely, especially if there's negative marking. So in a question paper like this year's CLAT, most of the questions were easy or moderate. They had some tough questions. So you must make sure that you choose your questions carefully and attempt those where you think you will be 100% correct. No point taking a chance with questions where you have no clue, because it's an unnecessary waste of a 0.25 quarter mark, because that quarter mark could get you the top college or it could make you lose a place in the top college. So you have to be very careful about it. Overall, the legal section was quite uh, moderately easy. Anyone who had studied, gone through the bills, gone through some of the Supreme Court judgments would have an advantage. But generally, it was a scoring section, and we feel if you got around 25 marks over 32 marks, that would be a good score to secure your seat in a top NLU. That's what uh, I would, that's what we think.
Yes, coming to quantitative techniques. So there were two sets asked, and totally there were 12 questions. And I believe it was one of the easiest sections we have seen so far in all of these CLAT entrance exams. The quantitative techniques asked were very simple. They were the operations-based questions were based on averages, ratios, percentages, and so on. Okay, so I would say it was quite easy. Set 1 was based on, let me show you. This is the set 1. So this was about employees, regular and self-employed, and from urban and rural, a very, very typical quantitative technique problem. So here they asked you about by what percentage, right? And then the ratio and so on. So you will see if you have practiced these kind of problems, these operations should be quite easy to perform. Similarly, here electrical and non-electric cars, that is other fuels being used. And in a state, they're asking you difference between state 1 and 2 and so on. Okay. So overall, a very, very easy section for a lot of people. That's my take on this section.
So anyone who took some time out and spent a little time on quant also would have scored really well, because quant, uh, uh, yeah, maths is all about practice, and they've given very basic percentage and ratio kind of problems. Ideally, you should have got 12 on 12. We have still kept some uh, breathing space here by saying you 10 on 12 is a good score. But this year's CLAT had really easy quant, and anyone who had focused slightly on quant, periodically done problems to practice it, would have definitely stood at an advantage here.
Okay. So this brings us to the end of discussion for this paper. Now, key takeaways from CLAT 2024. So let me give you my opinion first, and then Anita can pitch in. Well, in my opinion, I think it was quite an easy paper, but also well balanced, because compared to last year, the number of questions have reduced. You only had 120 questions to answer compared to last year, which had 150 questions. But the time was the same. It's 2 hours. The penalty for wrong answers is also same. It's 0.25 negative. So here, it was all about time management. You had plenty of time for this paper, but certain sections of the paper required you to spend more time, right? So how do you make sure that you do that? The answer is you practice. You practice with mock tests, you practice with our unit tests, and so on. So firstly, one thing is plenty of time, but about how you would manage per section. Secondly, I think English, quantitative techniques, and general knowledge was absolutely easy. When it came to logical reasoning, yes, critical reasoning questions were not that easy, um, moderately difficult, I would say. And your legal reasoning, you needed to pay close attention to what was being asked and what was actually based on the passage and what was not. So there you had to spend some time, and the situation based problems for the last paragraph I think was quite challenging, because one after the other you had different scenarios presented, and you had to go back to look at what principles you would apply for those scenarios. So I think overall, I think it's a good paper, a very scoring paper. And let's see how it goes. 10th of December, I think the results are coming. Um, so today is, I think by 7 p.m., the window to uh, raise objections to the answer key is being allowed. So those who have certain objections, you can do that. That's my take.
Yeah, I think you've kind of covered everything. But what I wanted to add was, what I realized is the paper, I feel, was well balanced. Initially, I thought it was really easy. But when you really look at the paper, you realize that there three areas were easy. That was English, uh, current affairs, and quant. But they balanced it out with moderately tough or moderately easy papers in the sense logical reasoning and legal section were time consuming, and also not everything was easy there. So they kind of balanced out the paper. Anyone who had prepared diligently would have scored well. And another takeaway is that, when I looked at current affairs or even the legal section, it seemed like the CLAT authorities had pulled out really relevant legal current affairs as well as events, content from events which had happened right in the last couple of months before the exam. So just keep that in mind when if you're preparing for the next set of CLAT exams, because any new bills, any important Supreme Court judgment, and any important event where India is playing a big role, whether it's international or local event, you have to make sure that you know about it. And things like if there's a war, you kind of need to also figure out some background history, because when we saw it in the Israel-Hamas passage, how they pulled out questions which were like, really had some history to it. So you kind of needed to know stuff like that. And, they also put in some absurd questions with names and knowing names of historical figures, full names rather. So, these kind of questions where you really don't know the answer, my advice to you is, it's better to leave it out, not attempt questions of this nature, because you're just jeopardizing that mark by
That's
losing a
true.
quarter mark there. But
That's true. If you
overall,
remember
good.
sorry to
Sorry,
interrupt you. Last year,
go
they
ahead.
had asked a question about the spelling for the Ukraine president, Volodymyr Zelensky. And I thought, we were spared that this year. They didn't ask any spellings. So,
No, that's true. I
well,
mean, they tend to ask spellings as well. So, I mean, CLAT has also been kind of tweaking their question paper. I mean, I give it to
yeah.
them. They are also not, they're trying to stay unpredictable. For instance, in the logical
Mm.
reasoning section this year, they were introduced a new type of logical reasoning question. And uh, when they started with the new pattern, they only had critical reasoning questions. Then the following year, they had an analytical reasoning problem. And this year, they've got a decision-making problem. So they're also playing around a bit with the type of questions they're introducing in the exam. And I feel that this is because they want to stay a bit unpredictable. But overall, keeping the paper kind of easy was good for the general population, because it seemed like most kids were very happy that they had done well. I rarely
Yes,
saw a kid who said they haven't. They all seemed pleased with how they had attempted the questions and leaving everyone on a happy note. So I think that was nice to see kids coming
yes,
out confident and saying they've done well in the paper. So that's about it. My takeaway is that anyone who's sitting for the exam for next year, make sure you prepare well, because you don't think that this year it's easy, so next year it's going to be easy, because they keep interchanging the level of whether they're going to make
difficult.
it easy or tough. So be prepared for tough. If easy comes, you'll be lucky and happy. If tough comes, you'll be prepared, so you'll be in a good place.
True. So this reminds me of a question that we often face, that is it the right time to start preparing for the next year's paper a year in advance? Say, for example, a student in class 10 or class 11, do they focus on their board exams, or is it something that is CLAT something that they can start preparing right away?
So, what I would advise is, see, now what we've seen is more than a lakh of students have shown interest in the CLAT. And with this, it seems like the numbers will keep increasing year on year. So if you've already decided that you want to go in for a you want to study law, go into the legal profession, then, and you want to appear for the exams by the NLUs, then it's a good time to start, whether you're in ninth standard, 10th standard, or 11th standard. The earlier, the better. So because you will have a head start, you will be more comfortable with the idea of giving a competitive exam, and you can fine tune where your weak areas. So I would say the moment you've decided you want to do law, just start preparing. Don't wait for the right time, because once you've made up your mind that you want to do law, I don't see the reason to hold off your training part of it. And
True.
the paper is easily available, so you can look at some of the old papers, figure out, and of course, we are here to help you if you need help with the training. And but preparation is essential for an exam of this nature, purely because there are very limited seats. If there are a lakh students showing interest in the exam and only under 3,000 seats, then you understand that it's going to be competitive. So at, you need to start preparing to have an advantage over all the others who also want to prepare for the exam. That's what I would say.
That's true. That's true. Because I think a lot of students, they think last 20 days, last 40 days, 60 days, they wonder, if is that all that time that is needed? But not really. The more time and effort you put in, the easier the exam becomes, right? So I think we'll end the session here. Thank you so much, Anita, for joining us. And
Thank you for
everyone
having
else,
me.
thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.